Welcome.
The Pathology Innovation Collaborative Community is a regulatory science initiative that aims to facilitate innovations in pathology, as well as advance safety and effectiveness evaluation. The PIcc Collaborative Community aims to harmonise approaches to speed delivery to patients through collaboration in the pre-competitive space. The PIcc is open to all stakeholders, public or private, including but not limited to academia, industry, healthcare providers, patients, and advocacy groups. Meetings of this kind are an example of lawful activity under federal antitrust law, because the focus of the meeting is on government action or policy, including the industry's responses or positions taken with respect thereto. However, antitrust monitoring is needed for companies' own protection, since they are direct competitors meeting together. These meetings need to stay within protected subject matters and need to be monitored so that they do not stray off into inappropriate areas, such as pricing and price terms, sales and service territories for particular products, customers and customer territories, each company's individual decisions regarding selection of suppliers or customers, marketing plans and especially future marketing plans or new product offerings, other proprietary or competitively sensitive information. Today's meeting will follow the written agenda, and there will be no discussion of pricing or other prohibited topics. If the discussion veers into those topics, we will terminate the discussion. If you have any questions or concerns about the propriety of a discussion, please raise it immediately, and we will take a break to determine how best to proceed. The Medical Device Innovation Consortium acts as the formal convener, and we will follow their conflict of interest policy. For additional information, we defer to our Code of Conduct and our website, www.pathologyinnovationcc.org. We look forward to moving the field forward.
So folks have this, and I guess we can get started. So we have some time for discussion, of course. Can you see my screen here?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, welcome to this month's steering committee from PIcc. Thank you, everyone, for submitting materials and updates. This time, and probably moving forward, we're going to switch this up a little because I think there's too little time for discussions and too many papers. So we put little summaries and, links will show up on the website, but there's only a very few publications and a lot more discussion happening today. And I hope that's in the interest of the broader community. And I want to get started right away, as I know everyone is very busy. And then if we end early, there's no harm. In any case, so a lot of things are happening, of course, with FDA, and a few updates that I believe are hopefully very useful as well as functional to many of you. The first part is, and please look at this breadcrumb line here, the breadcrumbs here, like where we are. So this is under the FDA Digital Health and AI Intelligence Glossary and Educational Resources section. And there's one about an FDA AI glossary, which might be very helpful. The link is hopefully already pasted in the chat. Yes, I see that. And keep in mind, these are the definitions directly and or taken indirectly from public resources. But whenever the FDA releases something like this, it's probably good to use these definitions as a portrait. And this is, I think it came out earlier this month, and I believe it's a great resource. And so I wanted to start with that as a great way to hopefully alleviate some of the confusion. The second part, which is announced to happen in December, so this is very early, but it was announced in early October, which is considered one of the key elements for the whole discussion about lab-developed tests. I'm sure you hopefully have seen this. If not, this is a very important part because here the FDA will release what they expect related to the stage 2 of the phase-out policy. So, of course, this is a very controversial topic. Nonetheless, this is a webinar that we should probably all attend. Two other quick elements from the agency. As many of you know, there are different ways to submit to the FDA. And I think this happened in June, and I'm trying to show you this. We share, of course, all the content, as always, on the website. There's a full presentation here. I just wanted to briefly show that PRISM, which is basically an electronic submission system, was introduced where the FDA will leverage cloud technology to progress regulatory digital transformation. This was actually agreed upon in PDUFA 7. And this includes how to actually use a so-called standard protocol template to accelerate review and provide, many different aspects. This is a FDA-owned and FDA-authorized information system that is composed of many different components. I cannot go through the exact definition and functionalities today, but this is driven by Precision FDA, a group that we discussed before. And this creation of different, what they call spaces, private space, where users can and allow people to have access is, I think, revolutionary. So in case you're interested in how this will look like moving forward, there's a full-on presentation shared, I hope, in a link with you that might be very helpful. And we will also share, this was a summary and an overview article by Alexander Gaffney, written here, I think, for Politico, if I recall correctly. But this is a beautiful outline of what elements the FDA is trying to address and, related to, cloud-based submission protocols. The next quick update is, I believe, a very interesting resource. This is basically like a trailer for all the important things to come for 2025. And the FDA distinguishes the A list from the B list. A list identifies the priority guidance documents and basically distinguishing certain elements here. And in the final guidance topics, so that is called the A list, that will move from draft to final. You see the LDT rule, enforcement discretion policy regarding special controls, is on that list, or marketing submission recommendations for PCCP, for AI-enabled devices with software functions. And in the draft guidance topic, you see lifecycle management considerations, as well as enforcement discretion policy for LDTs for unmet needs. So this is probably coming out in early 2025, and definitely hitting some of the topics that we care about. One element, and of course, this is not today's webinar, that's just the cover of a webinar that happened on the 24th. That was also related to including LDT. So this is related to the final policy. Let me just blow this up. You see there were many topics, including expected values, performance characteristics, reagents, labels. I know some of you have probably attended this, and I wanted to briefly take a moment to maybe open it up for a brief discussion, because I know there were a lot of topics covered in this webinar. I won't summarize this, but if anyone wants to comment on this, I don't know, on these topics here that we just went over, it would be great.
So I have a
Yep.
question that might be a little bit silly, and it's just probably just ignorance on my part. So, relating to the FDA using cloud services, I don't know exactly what was done before. Was everything kind of application process driven? Because saying you're using cloud services is just like, what does that mean? They just meant they didn't have an in-house data center and they put it on Amazon Web Services, or does it mean like it's an entire web-driven workflow? The word cloud just seems like it's loaded to mean a lot, or could mean nothing.
So I think this so-called electronic common technical document and a electronic submission was a breakthrough. I don't know exactly when that happened. That was one key element. but with certain requirements to submit larger data elements and many more distributed teams. I think one of the ideas behind this platform is that you can do more and use compute as well as certain statistical functions. I don't know if that's a sufficient answer. I think that it's cloud-based is just one of the many features. It might have looked a little bit strange. So in the presentation that was shared, there's a lot more detail about this. So I just picked these two things because I made note of this. I can show you real quick. There's a lot more details around what that looks like. For example, they want cloud-based regulatory scientific solution processes that improve the submission. So there's an abstract plan. You can see what they're trying to gain from this. There's also this element of interactive communication. In other words, I believe that does that need cloud? I'm not 100% sure, but that the communication works in a more streamlined fashion is one of the things and one of the intended outcomes of this entire element. There are also many folks that submit to the FDA that are not necessarily within the jurisdiction of the FDA, meaning US soil. You see there are components like GDPR or ISO certification that can be addressed in this. And this platform is trying to, help with many of these aspects. So I'm not sure if that answers your question specifically why it had to be cloud, but it is, I believe it's AWS based, and it is a platform that's owned by the FDA that is trying to address some of these common issues related to submissions that might benefit from a more distributed compute and storage infrastructure.
Yeah, no, I thank you, Joe. I think that was actually pretty helpful. It's just kind of funny that that there's emphasis on cloud, but it's like there's so much more loaded behind that the word cloud doesn't imply.
But absolutely, I'm also thinking, a lot of people have discussed that, is it really just the documentation that the FDA sees, or is there more behind it? Is there data sharing happening? Do they want to see, trial documents, additional components, study protocols? So I think it's a pretty bold vision. Some of the elements in PDUFA 7 suggested that there should be more interactive and more, sort of like compute-based
I think,
yeah. Go ahead.
sorry, it says drugs and biologics, and I think it's probably applying to that primarily because
Correct.
FDA always receives, the clinical study data, and I think I see that they have compute there. I mean, all of those interfaces that they have is compute. So probably it's actually instead of then sending data, because they used to send us data in other formats, it might be a common space, so that both sides can work on it. I'm guessing, but that's amazing if they did that actually.
I mean, you see here the RStudio
Yeah.
with the notebooks.
Yeah.
That is more than a traditional submission of a
Right.
trial package or
Right.
a drug response or pharmacokinetics elements. I believe the intent is that the investigators and regulators, reviewers can have more interactive exposure to the data. And I believe this might be still a pilot if I'm not mistaken, but it is, I think it is, it's called an information service module. And this was presented earlier in June, but several people sent a link and asked, is this going to be one of the ways that the FDA is anticipating to deal with all these submissions coming? I can't say anything about that. I don't know if someone who's on from the FDA can make a comment on this. I believe this is, as you said, more for the Center of Biologics Evaluation, where probably more tricky questions about some of the drug and compound data can be asked. But I definitely thought Precision FDA resonated, and this approach is definitely of interest.
So who
Hey
bears
Joe,
the?
this is Laura.
Oh, go ahead,
I'm
Laura.
sorry. Yeah, so this is Laura at AstraZeneca. I was actually just on a call with somebody, one of the architects behind this from FDA, who's recently left FDA, is now DNA nexus. That we were actually just talking about this and how FDA is definitely considering how they're going to use cloud-based technology to facilitate the massive data transfers that they need.
Very cool. Any other comments? Maybe all right, let's move on. So there's of course a few updates, no slides here. We had a chance to re-engage with the FNIH, Foundation of the National Institute of Health, about our project. I think the current working name was Project X. We received feedback. The feedback has to be incorporated, and Alex Karagiris is helping quite a bit on managing this. We will have an update presumably next month, or we will send out the link to the website when all the FNIH material is uploaded. One new project that I know several of you have spoken to me about beforehand, and I put here sort of like a beautiful sunrise up, is related to monitors in digital pathology. And monitor performance characteristics, I don't know, for safe use, let's put this in parentheses, addresses or is an issue right now. And the issue is as follows. So monitors are currently part of the regulatory approval package. Some people refer to that as the PIcc pathway. And aside from one modular component that has now been approved, some of the PACS or image management systems, monitors in clinical use often differ. They might be of high quality, but they're not necessarily the approved monitor that's part of that approval. So the question is, what can we do if the end-to-end element is validated, but what do you use for actually viewing? And it was a proposal that there's a pathway to assess these so-called performance characteristics. And this is a largely oversimplified approach to determine equivalency. So this is a note towards this, meaning this is not proven. And this is a proposal, and I want to briefly take you through and definitely hear your thoughts on this. So currently there's a few approved displays. And a pathway, of course, there needs to be a pathway where we talk to the FDA. And the pathway is called Safety and Performance-Based Pathway, or SPBP. Very complicated to say. I'm glad I didn't butcher this. So this SPBP pathway proposes the following. So maybe some of the approved displays have certain performance metrics or performance standards, but they may be missing. They might be established for those approved displays, but currently we don't know what the performance standards, let's call it the minimum performance standards, are. So we must establish assessment criteria. That would be a scientific question. And one approach would be to measure this and determine what those minimum performance or criteria should be, review and analyze this, and potentially submit this or create this jointly with the researchers in the agency to establish what current performance standards of approved displays are and or what established criteria should be. And this would be, let's call it a set of criteria that could be submitted to this so-called safety and performance-based pathway, where jointly these criteria would be established. And then moving forward, you need to measure and determine those those features, and they can be reviewed and analyzed. And then monitors would fall basically within an equivalent category with the same or slightly different performance metrics. Now, there's no guarantee that this will work, and this is currently entirely hypothetical. But to make this a little more concrete, one element that was proposed is, could we make this a Q submission and ask the question whether this approach would be feasible? So in quick summary, currently monitors are part of the pixel pathway that's approved end-to-end. And this would be one way to potentially establish the minimum performance characteristics through a SPBP pathway for review and analysis of these features to identify displays of equivalent, let's say, quality and or performance characteristics that would be safe to use. So I stop right there. And here's the link to this SPBP pathway that was actually recently updated. So if you can paste the link, that would be great. Any comment, thoughts, ideas?
Joe, I have one.
Yeah, go ahead. Yes.
You know, the whole display being part of the pixel pathway, the approved displays were, at least in the initial submissions, were basically sort of carryovers from radiology and assumed requirements from, no evidence-based criteria. They were just submitted as part of the pixel pathway in an effort to confirm FDA approval, but not necessarily based on any evidence. And so my only concern about using the approved displays as the baseline is that we don't have any evidence that either A, the approved displays are actually required for optimal outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And, I am hesitant to, and this age-old question of how much resolution, how much color, how much DPI do you need in order to make a diagnosis has never really been appropriately studied for pathology. And so I feel like we're putting the cart in front of the horse here a little bit in sort of making regulations based on practice that has been established without evidence.
Great point. Nonetheless, the displays are approved and are part of the authorization. So
Joe, maybe I misunderstood. So I didn't interpret what you said to mean that the starting point was using the performance characteristics of existing approved monitors. Were you suggesting that was the starting point?
no.
Okay, so I didn't
maybe I
take that.
interpreted this diagram wrong. I mean, the diagram starts with the arrow going from approved displays.
So typically the safety and performance-based pathway has as one requirement that there is an approved device. That is the case. Now, currently, what I think you said, Mike, is that performance standards are currently missing. We do not know. I mean, these approved displays are the highest quality that were available at the time, and they were chosen because chances of regulatory approval were high. I'm just saying that, like, I presume it was. At least for the one instrument precision study that I was involved in, that was the case. Now, the performance standards are currently missing. We do not know what the minimum standards for display are. So the idea would be that we must establish that. That is starting from scratch. Sorry, maybe that's misleading in this portrayal. So we do not know this part here at all.
I think there have been a couple studies that may have been done. I feel like Dave McClintock may have one that is in this realm, but I don't know if it got to the specific minimum performance standards. But I know he does have a couple papers. Go ahead.
Yeah, so Kevin, I know that there are papers out there where people basically demonstrated that, let's say, equivalence or concordance. What I think is needed for this would be that the protocol to establish these criteria and the modalities how to measure this would need to be run by the agency, basically as a regulatory compliant approach for doing it. And then that would be the results of a study like that would show this with, let's call it, a regulatory ready grade. So it's a little bit different than saying, look, we came up with this in a research study. So it would be delineating how elements work. And I know several people within the agency are actually actively studying this. For example, color profiles, pixel representation, the equivalence of things on screen versus in a computer. But this would be an approach to at least get one element of the pixel pathway to a evidence-based, criteria-based standard to then hopefully enable, which features or which characteristics of a display might be sufficient to fulfill these established criteria.
I'm working on them.
You working on that case?
Yeah.
So far, an idea. Probably.
I think we should move forward with this for sure.
Thank you. Janet.
Hey, Joe, I like the concept. I'm not super familiar with the QSub program, but it's my understanding that you can't really bring policy questions per se, that you need to come with a particular product and ask questions about the product. So do we essentially need some kind of exemplar display to use as the vehicle to bring these questions forward?
That is a very good question. I mean, Brandon, do you know?
Yeah, let me see if I can help here. First of all, there's different kinds of QSubs. One definitely is called a pre-market, something related to pre-market discussion for a specific device. But there's also information QSubs, and I think, hearing what I heard about there being studies already out there, I think you could package that up to share that kind of information and talk about this kind of plan and see what kind of, and maybe even ask for some feedback on what are the best steps to take. I do think that a feature of this pathway says that these criteria need to exist in some FDA guidance document or approval or something. And so how could you get that kind of criteria into an official FDA? I can't remember which documents exactly, but I know that if they're in a guidance document, that's a good location. Or if they're in a approval document, decision document, that would be another way, because I think this pathway is supposed to refer to an existing FDA document that provides these performance criteria for a successful device. I would be a little bit careful about just an information QSub, because that is one directional sharing. Yep. So I would definitely try and frame it as a different kind of QSub, and maybe an exemplar display so that you can actually ask questions from the agency and we would give answers. Because I think the idea is what data can we as a collaborative group generate that would demonstrate criteria that would make the regulators happy, of which I'm one.
Thanks, Brandon. That was helpful.
I mean, if I recall correctly, the paper from Dave McClintock had several different displays. I don't know if someone else on the call recalls that from the top of their head, but I think they had different panel types, etc. I don't know, I can check, but it would be, for example, to use one of those monitors and Yeah.
And another thing, just brainstorming with the LDT rule, there's a lot of asking of groups that didn't actually create the device to create the clearance, for these devices that are used in clinical practice, but not classified as medical devices or cleared medical devices. So maybe being able, because of that, opens the door to others besides the manufacturer to try and clear a device. So
Yeah, that's a very controversial topic, because on the one hand, the developer might not manufacture or produce the device, but might take on the responsibility of putting that as part of a device. So
right.
that might be also a great question to include. So maybe for those who are not too familiar with this, so normally when you take an approved device, which might be composed of the scanner, the software, and the display, and you modify it, let's say you replace the display that's authorized with a non-authorized display, you modify the device that's authorized, thereby making it an LDT. So that is definitely pertinent to this discussion. And with a QSUB, you usually get an answer. It might not be the answer that you want, but that's certainly something that might be of interest. Question is, of course, who would be the submitter of this QSUB, but we can discuss that maybe internally, maybe Jitesh with MDIC being the convener. The group might make this a project and write sort of the text, and then not sure who would be the submitter on record, but we can figure that out. So maybe for those who are interested in joining this, we probably do a quick 30 or 45-minute meeting in the near future to just discuss what a QSUB would look like, because it requires just to outline the problem, and then there's a specific format to ask the question, and then we can probably pursue this fairly quickly. So please shoot Noor a brief text message with your email or your name, and then we can include you on the invite. That would be great. And for those who will watch this recording, please feel free to just email our normal email address, etc. Okay, you may have seen that two of our, or were there other questions, sorry, before moving on? And here's that link and website again. So we shared this, of course, with you. Right, moving on. In terms of the LDT final rule, I think you're all aware we presented this here before. There's an active lawsuit happening, and as supportive evidence, two amicus brief or breviae were submitted, one by ASCP, and there's also one that was submitted by CAP. There's a beautiful video with Dr. Karcher explaining and outlining some of the details. And I took here an interesting snippet out of the amicus brief from ASCP here. You see that slides and digital images of slides are not laboratory tests and therefore cannot be LDTs. And then here this a beautiful sending, however, the FDA's commentary, the final rule that intends to regulatory has thrown the field into chaos. I just wanted to share this here also with our colleagues, the FDA. It is very complicated for the average pathologist to see through all these different elements, especially when the production and review of glass slides clearly currently is not part of the authority. But in any case, just wanted to point out that I believe actually in both amicus briefs from both societies, digital pathology is specifically mentioned, and that pathology practice and laboratories are currently feeling the consequence already. It's stated in here, many groups are hesitant to make investments the topic about monitors that we just discussed is one of many, many different modules and elements that are there, and we get to AI in a minute, but, AI, PCCP, what we just discussed here, where other guidances are coming, basically requires, at least on the anatomic pathology side, that the slides are being scanned, and that requires digital pathology. So this is highly pertinent. Okay. Moving on, MDIC, I think there's two quick updates here. I don't know if Noor or Jitesh, if you want to say something about this.
I can. Yeah, thank you,
Hi.
Joe.
Hey.
We have recently released this document focusing on PCCP. It was written by a lot of subject matter experts from industry, mainly industry focusing on the IVD or diagnostic side. So some of you might see it's very relevant. We are also working on some case studies and example, but this is the phase one of that activity. So again, like most other MDIC resources, this is a free download in a 20 or 30 pages document. Noor has already posted the link on the chat, so please feel free to access, review, and if there are, feedback, because PCCP is a very evolving topic now with the new guidance and so on. So, let us know how we can improve or, come up with additional information around PCCP and related topics. That's the update number one. And update number two is, if folks who are in California area, we have a quality-based workshop happening. That will be at the Edward Life Science campus. Again, there's a link to the events and MDIC website. You can see the event. A lot of this workshops that we have been taking as a roadshow across the country now, considering how much feedback we are getting from FDA to improve CAPA and quality as a culture and so on. So a lot of really valuable resource. This is not specific to diagnostics or digital pathology, but any device a manufacturer, QA and RA and quality professionals will be extremely valuable. Those two are my update slides. But in addition to that, maybe Joe, we probably want to briefly discuss a potential for PIC's in-person meeting, maybe for late 2025. I think, creating events takes time, and I don't know what kind of suggestions you all may have, so I just wanted to sow the seed here so that we can have some idea, to bring the community together. Aspiration here is it cannot be just a, update meeting like this one. It has to be a little bit more tactical and more, strategic. So what kind of networking and agenda we should develop, that's something which I wanted to hear from you all. Again, MDIC will be just a convener and host. We probably will explore whether we can co-host it with some other, association or academy, university or even a manufacturer, because usually events are expensive when we go to Marriott's or Hyatt or Hilton, right? So we wanted to make it a little more sustainable. So again, suggestions on location, suggestions on partners, and actual suggestions on what will be useful to bring, when we bring the community together.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing this up. So let's just open it up to the group. There are many meetings happening. Typically, we had a 1 or 2 day event, typically with an agenda, one time we had more of a broader element with external societies invited. One time we had a very concrete aim to derive a project from that, which we're currently in discussion with FNIH about. So we're free to design this. This should come from the community. So let's discuss it.
Well, if you're thinking in the May timeframe, I mean, I'd like the idea of co-hosting meetings given the number of meetings that I have to attend. So if this was tied to something like API, I think that would be fantastic. The Pathology Informatics Summit.
Yeah, I agree with that.
That is in May, right?
I believe so.
Usually, yeah, I think it's been moved to Michigan from Pittsburgh the last few years.
Mhm. Just quickly.
The other option is, would we consider USCAP in March? Is that too early?
Too early. Sorry, I mean, it takes time,
Can't go to
irrespective.
USCAP. I got to cover all the people who are going.
So this is May 19th through 22nd. That's still fairly early, right? That doesn't give us a
We could
lot
shoot
of
for
time.
next year Path Visions, which is coming up next week.
We have actually had our, I think, first meeting at Path Visions, and they were so far very generous. And we have a session here. I have that on one of the next slides here, actually, about this year's Path Visions. But that is, of course, does anyone know where that will be next year?
I think it's San Diego.
Also
Quick
not
Google
that.
search says San Diego.
San Diego, yeah.
And it's probably going to be October again, right?
Yeah, I think
No,
it will be earlier in October.
October 5 to 7.
Does someone have the link?
Yes, I can paste it. Actually, it's all the DPA events, actually. It's there in 2025.
Okay, so of course, the question then is, location timing. It seems that it would be a lot more convenient and probably more financially sustainable to tie it to an event where most of the people with relevant subject matter expertise will be anyway. And I think the AP Path Informatics and Path Visions definitely would fulfill that, I think.
Interesting. They're doing it in 2026 in San Diego too.
Yeah, they tend to buy 2 years back to back they get better deals.
Yeah, and it's also funny that Path Visions is overlapping with the Advamed MedTech exactly on the same days in San Diego.
Oh,
Same, I mean, yeah, it's in San Diego too.
that sounds like a very good synergy, I believe. Any other suggestions about potential conferences or so?
If you go the Path Visions route, you might want to check. I'm just going to be speaking for CAP at this point. You might want to check what other pre-meeting events might be going on, because I assume that if we were to have a PICC meeting, that would probably be pre-conference. And I
Fair
don't think I've
point.
really ever seen post-conference, but like pre-conference, I have the Digital and Computational Pathology Committee meeting. I think 2 days before the conference, and then I have DICOM Working Group 26 and IHE Path Pathology and Laboratory Medicine usually during the morning of the pre-conference workshops. So there's a couple of things that I would look into if you decide to go with Pathology Visions in terms of other things already bolted onto it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the DICOM working group and some of the other pre-meetings. Not sure if we can account for all of that, but
Sure.
great point, of course.
But those same people being at those meetings might be fun to, bring to some of this as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so maybe we can come back to this, what's useful, maybe towards a later stage today, because there's a few other topics that might trigger some of the points that we may want to cover in an in-person meeting. Let's briefly go through some of those, because I think we have Bob Tessier here from PNPL. A quick pointer here to their website. It's a think tank, and they have been very active over the last couple of months in PICC, but also outside of PICC. And Bob has kindly provided this update here. And there's 5 points that he wants to share. Let me just take this ribbon off here so we have a little more space. Bob, hand it over to you.
Okay, well, I just thought that first the article that was just recently appeared in Radiology Business talking about 5 of the 7 Medicare administrative contractors have approved payment for imaging AI software. And I thought that that certainly gives us an interesting input to the possibility of what might happen as it relates to the possibility of AI reimbursement as well for pathology services. So I think the key thing is the more we know about what's happening with our colleagues in the world of radiology and can translate that to pathology, I think so much the better in terms of communication. So I'm going to be anxious to gather some more information. We have contacts with the Radiology Business Managers Association. Linda Wilgus, who's their co-executive director, has been willing to communicate with me on behalf of both the RBMA as well as the American College of Radiology. So I will see what information I can gather on that, and that there's some information on that article about reimbursement, and we'll see where the input meets the road relative to how it could be effective in terms of pathology. So that's one consideration. Next item would like to talk about would be simply the fact that we've been gathering information or trying to gather information about the cost of AI applications in pathology. And we've also learned about those folks who have significant budget considerations about all kinds of numbers and dollars, and they haven't translated to anything that's kind of a common denominator. So my common denominator is it being a consideration of a cost for AI on a per slide basis. We've heard numbers in the range of $14, which I think is totally unsustainable. We've also heard numbers along the lines of $35 a case for prostate cases, which I think is a very reasonable and fair number. But of course, vendors aren't necessarily willing to release their cost information, but ultimately through our 13 PNPL members and through about 20 different groups that we're working with outside of PNPL, we're going to be gathering the information on what those costs look like and how they can be effectively passed through and justified as part of the additional costs associated with doing the procedure in the first place. So that's one of the things we're going to be exploring. We've also been having conversations with the DPA Reimbursement Task Force, specifically Paul Gerard, and also we hope to have conversations with Dr. Lawhan at the CAP Economic Affairs Committee, because I think so far a lot of people are anticipating that information on costs are being presented to the AMA RUC group, and the AMA RUC group says there's nowhere to be found any information being provided. So ultimately, there seems to be a big concern about the issue of coding and reimbursement versus coverage. And now I've heard that there's a significant pothole, if you will, as it relates to coverage. Again, mere mortals like myself don't get involved with the conversations as to what coverage means, but I'm hoping to learn some more about that and be able to provide some insights on that down the line. So we're going to be trying to get in touch with both the DPA as well as the CAP Economic Affairs Committee, because these Category 3 codes are never going to get to Category 1 codes unless somebody provides some good data. And again, from my last conversation with Zeke Silva, who's the chair of the AMA RUC, he indicated they're still waiting for anybody to provide information on what those cost numbers might be so they can evaluate both costs as well as utilization. And then I just wanted to also bring up the fact that we've had an interesting conversation this week with a very interesting Bayer webinar on changing breast cancer screening. They were talking about various radiologists discussing their experience with this. We wound up meeting a guy named Mark Trails at the University of Michigan, and he had some very significant experience with regard to AI applications in radiology. And right now we're trying to connect the dots because we have a diagnostic medicine focus group with 3 or 4 prominent radiologists, and we have a number of prominent pathologists as well. And ultimately, we're interested in finding out how these two groups can work together for mutual benefit and communication. Mark was very specific about how patients who had breast cancer had significant waiting times to be able to get their diagnosis and their clinical input, and he felt that this could be significantly expedited. So as a result of his conversations and other people from the University of Texas in Galveston, PNPL as a think tank has agreed this year to advancing breast cancer as being our #1 clinical priority. And we're going to be interested in trying to bring together significant elements in pathology as well as radiology to see if we can come up with some conclusions as to how to make that happen and be more expedited for the benefit of patients. So those are the things that we wanted to bring to the table today.
Thank you, Bob. Those are excellent points. And as we brainstorm, for example, on some of the topics for our annual meeting next year, I think some of those hopefully resonate. I think in particular, CAP, the Economic Affairs Committee, some of the CIPI, the Council for Innovation in Pathology Informatics is definitely also thinking about some of these elements. So I'm sure we can bring a group together. I want to move forward. The DPA has put together a beautiful frequently asked question set. It's on a website with very pertinent questions. So what CPT codes can apply to digital pathology, staying with the theme that Bob just said, and also other elements here about slide formats, etc., which I thought was very informative. A quick pointer, there's a PIcc session at Pathology Visions 2024. If you are going, please join us. We will probably have a get-together the night before on November 4th, just at the main hotel, at the main lobby. We're going to meet there probably at 7. I will add that in an email, quick reminder next week beforehand. And the session itself is in track 2, Regency Room Q, called Advancing Regulatory Science in Digital and Computational Pathology, collaborative dialogue. It's, I think, a total of 5 people. Keith Wharton, Jitesh Vitil, Brandon Gallis, and Alexander Krylov from UVM. And I have the pleasure of moderating this. Moving forward, there's a couple of resources I wanted to share real quick. One came from NIST, an interesting cryptographic standards guidelines and examples with intermediate values. So in case you're interested in any of these elements, beautiful vector code sets shared. And then one element here, privacy preserving large language models. There was a quick publication on this topic. In the DEI section, there's a fantastic example-based publication, Statistical Methods in Cancer Research. This is volume 5. There are other volumes. This is specifically discussing bias assessment in case control and cohort studies. And I must say, I read several chapters in this book. It's available for free. We share it, of course. They're really beautifully illustrated to identify why certain studies are or statistical association or case control studies are biased. 3 other quick pointers from the Europe and beyond. One element is that the WHO is setting right now international standards for cancer genomics with several specific focus areas, taking into account already existing available standards. You see some of these here are more like, single gene or single event patterns, but here this goes a little bit beyond this, and just wanted to give a quick pointer. And then another WHO resource, also thanking our friends over there, is about so-called essential IVDs. These are defined as a specific need And this was the process for selection and finally how in online meetings, this so-called strategic advisory group or SAGE was making the decisions to put the things on the map. On the Europe side, the recommendations for the access or the realization of the European health data space have been released. This is volume 2. And, you know, as a small token, there's a life cycle regarding recommendations for data integrity that I was very happy to see that some of the health policy work that I was doing with the group here was reflected in this. And then one other pointer for medical devices, the guidance on qualification of an IVD medical device. This is the final guidance is out, and that came out earlier here. Patient advocacy. I don't know if Brittany is on. I know Friends is, of course, moving forward at light speed pace with the Digital Path project. I don't know, Brittany, if you maybe want to say a few words around that, or... Mm-hmm. Brittany, you on? Can you hear me? No, we can, of course, move on. We can come back to that later. A few final quick resources. One paper here written by Imogen Fit is tackling pictures, pixels, and PIcc systems. And the part that I thought was very well done is fairly simple, yet intuitively convincing figures about some of these very complex systems and how they interrelate to one another. Another figure that I thought was really well done is this figure here on the left that shows the distinct use cases for digital pathology, you know, from real-world data archives to conferences and, you know, different areas. So please take a look. Of course, there's a lot more here that I won't have time to go into. An article published through LinkedIn as a discrete source comes from a colleague and friend, Renato Humeton from Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. You see the title here, and it's a fairly concise but well-written piece on generative AI in healthcare, and many of you know that they have implemented quite a few interesting elements. And then another glossary, similar to what we started with the FDA glossary here on slide 3, which is the AI glossary. There's also a glossary jointly collaborated and drafted by the FDA and NIH called the Terminology for Clinical, in this case, of course, cancer research. And many of these components here, for example, stepped wedge cluster randomized trials, are going beyond just like basic glossaries. These are very specific, but also you see things like synthetic data. So please take a look. I thought that was great. To stay on time, 3 quick pointers to papers. One is, in this case here, testing and evaluation of large language models. The FDA perspective on the regulation of AI in healthcare. You see some of the people here, Bob Califf, Troy Tasbass. So this comes from the agency. And then a quick sort of with a wink, a great article by Dario Amodei called The Machines of Loving Grace and how AI may actually has, you know, large underappreciated radical upsides. Now, a quick pointer, our next meeting, typically done on a Wednesday, as today, 3 to 4, would be on Wednesday just before Thanksgiving. And as previously done, I think when we collided with the day before Christmas, we will have the meeting. Please bring your favorite drink. And we wanted to briefly touch base and just do more of a social. So of course, please send materials. We will release that, but we will use that meeting mostly to get together and start moving towards that holiday. I stopped sharing. If there's any last minute comments, statements, links, or anything you would like to share, that would be great. Any thoughts? No? All right. Well, that concludes this month's PICC meeting, and I hope to see you soon, close to Thanksgiving. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. Bye.